much corruption, there's so much lack of responsiveness or transparency from the government, and of course there are all the issues that we're talking about here today, which is a lack of civil and political rights, intimidation and fear that then result in local people not standing up for what they actually want, but just going along with a bad project design, or getting out of the way of a mega project, even if they means that they've lost their land and lost their livelihoods. So one wonders actually what the development community is actually doing in Laos. From a rights perspective, it's quite clear that they're not doing terribly much. And I think there needs to be a really thorough examination what is being achieved when you talk about good governance, when you talk about participatory development, when you're dealing with a government partner like the government of Laos. Okay, the floor is open.
I'm not a journalist.
That's okay. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Andrew Silver, retired un-American. All the countries of the region have more or less authoritarian governments. And we can easily describe the raison d'etre of some of these regimes. Just for two examples that you may not agree with my description, but the Burmese regime up to 5 years ago could be described as a kleptocracy. Chinese regime can be described as seeking greater economic, political, and military power. And I think most of you in these rooms can characterize the governments of Cambodia, Malaysia, and Vietnam. But I have no idea how one would characterize Laos. Can you do so?
Well, let me just start. I would say quite clearly it is a one-party authoritarian state where, you know, there is an impression given that it's, as Shui Meng was mentioning, that it is charming, that it is, that the people are so generous. And in fact, it is what I would say is a sort of a government that in many cases is slow to respond. But if you go towards core interests, if you talk about issues related to development budgets or any sort of challenge, real or perceived, by the government to their power, they will react quickly and very thoroughly to arrest, imprison, and put people through unfair legal processes, and then put them into one of the worst, most opaque prison systems in the region. I mean, there's a reason that there's little research done on Laos. There's two reasons. One is, frankly, that too many people are focusing on other countries like the ones you mentioned, and Laos doesn't get enough attention. But the other side is that people are very afraid to speak about what's taking place there, and it becomes very difficult to access things like the prison system or the judicial system, because there's so little cooperation from the government to enable that. So, you know, we did a report several years ago about a drug detention center outside of Vientiane, documenting abuses, and I will tell you it was very difficult to do. And the government denied everything, lock, stock, and barrel, even though we had photographs and other sorts of evidence. Facing that, it becomes very difficult to make any sort of progress. And that's why I think the pressure from the international community, and particularly from foreign donors, for whom Laos depends a great deal for their government budgets, is so critical at this point. And this ASEAN Leaders Summit, I think, is the penultimate opportunity for the international community to raise some of these very serious human rights concerns and demand that Laos tackle these abuses and end these abuses.
Phil said, As Phil said, yes, definitely one single party regime, very much what we will have in Vietnam or China. I think maybe a difference here is that talking about capacity, I mean, that's an issue if you compare these countries who are very similar in terms of political regime, but I think the capacity is very different. I think Laos PDI is a poor country in the region, but at the same time it does not excuse the lack of responsiveness on the human rights concern we have. And maybe if I can just add something on that, on the lack of responsiveness, because I would like to go back again on the case of it's not working. Hello? Yeah, okay.
I'll use another one.
I just want to insist on that again, because that's something we were discussing with Shui Meng before the discussion started, and we were also talking about the case of Somchai in Thailand, and we are kind of comparing the response of the government on the two cases. Obviously, in the case of Somchai in Thailand, we are also facing very, very complex constraints to move this case forward. Having said that, we are able to dialogue, we are able to engage, we are receiving response, and we are trying. And then in that context, we are able to move the agenda somehow. In the case of Sombath, unfortunately, we are not receiving this level of response from the government. And then I can give you again examples in the context of the UN. The High Commissioner, who is the highest authority of the United Nations on human rights, wrote to the government of Laos PDI in 2014 on the case of Sombath. He never received a response, but no response at all, which we cannot imagine in the context of Thailand, for example. The last time that Laos PDR raised the issue, it was in 2005, that's true, at the UPR, but having said that, they did not respond to the UN mechanism who have been raising the case with the government since 2013. So I think this is unacceptable, and I think why we need to be stronger on this case. Our office, the international community, and the donors, and the ASEAN, it may be a good opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have maybe time for one more question.
Not press again. Paul Greening, worked for international NGOs and UN in Asia for many years, including Laos. One thing I wondered, anyone that's worked with the Laos government is aware of and criticizes the low capacity. What is their capacity with online surveillance? And how great is that capacity? I believe they have got Chinese technology that helps them with that. Another quick question. I lived in Indonesia under Suharto for many years, and I lived for about a year in Laos. It's interesting the attitude, both very repressive regimes, but in Indonesia, there was a lot of jokes. Even people in the street would talk and criticize the government in Suharto, make jokes about him, etc. You could feel the opposition. In Laos, no one, even when I hinted towards it, people moved away, people wouldn't talk about politics, there was no jokes going on about political leaders and things like that. I can't work out whether that is apathy, fear, lack of interest, or a mixture of all of these. Not everyone, but generally people in the street, I noticed that general difference. Quick comment on the international NGOs there. If you're in Laos and your kid's in a nice international school, you've got cheap beer Laos, you've got a nice job, you can cycle to work, why risk it all by making a fuss? Sometimes you can maneuver around the government. For example, I had a literacy project. You couldn't call it literacy for women because there was no literacy need. They'd actually reached all their objectives, and there was 98% literacy, when in fact it was probably about 5% in some of the regions we're working in. So you change it and you call it something else to actually accomplish that. But that takes a little bit more time, it takes a bit more maneuvering. It's easier just to go along with the government to do a project which is not going to be particularly effective. They're going to be happy. Your kids stay in international school, you're drinking beer loud down by the river on Saturdays, and everything's fine. Unfortunately, that is the attitude of the international community there. Not always, but often.
I would just say that in discussing the situation, I guess, in Laos and the difference between Laos and other places, that I think that the level of fear that we see in civil society reminds me very much of what we saw during military-controlled Burma, during the SLORC period and then later the SBDC period, where talking about forbidden issues on the streets of the capital, Rangoon, could get you in trouble. That people in tea shops were always looking over their shoulders for informers, and were very reticent to say anything publicly, much less make a joke. I mean, at that time, of course, particularly in the 1990s, the social media wasn't anywhere near as prevalent as it is now, but there was that same sort of fear. And I think that fear also continues in countries like Laos. In speaking with the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Freedom of Peaceful Assembly and Association, Maina Kai, a couple months ago when I saw him in Kenya, he remarked to me that Laos was unique in his experience for the level of fear that he was seeing amongst civil society. And so I think that the government of Laos has done a very effective job in intimidating its people, and I think that they are aiming at trying to keep people quiet so that their malfeasance and their human rights abuses are not being challenged by the people. So I think that is where we're seeing it. I mean, if there was a level of kind of joking that, for instance, you saw in other countries, like, for instance, Malaysia, where, internet images of Najib in a clown mask circulate on Twitter and on Facebook, I'm sure that the Lao authorities would have arrested quite a few people who were involved in that. So, quite different situation.
Just a quick comment. I think the big difference is we have to understand that Laos has a very small population. I think almost every family has some experience of what happened to one or two of their near or distant relatives after 1975. Some experience of one or two close or distant relatives who have gone to the re-education camp. Some have come back, some have not. Some have risked swimming across the Mekong. And the diaspora that left Laos actually wiped out 10% of the Lao population. And most of them actually belong to the more educated class. So that experience combined with what Phil has said, fear. Recently at the APF meeting, at just a panel discussion, people were asked me what are the biggest challenge facing human rights defenders. My answer was that no one in Laos, in his or her right mind, will call himself or herself a human rights defender. Secondly, the biggest challenge is fear. The fear that takes over your mind and your emotion. And that fear is more powerful than seeing soldiers on the streets, seeing police on the street. In Laos, you don't see a lot of presence of the military or the police, but you know they're there. And you don't know when they will turn up on your doorstep.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming today. Those who wish to speak to the speakers or interview them, of course, they'll be around up here at the podium, or you can find them elsewhere in the club. And for those who are going to ASEAN in Vientiane, good luck. I hope you can raise those human rights issues that we spoke about, and obviously we're happy to help you do so. Thank you so much.